Hi friends, hello, hi, how are you? I hope you guys are having an amazing day today. Hello, hi. So candle of the day today, it is orange pineapple punch. You can see that despite being in the middle of a blizzard here in upstate New York, I still wish I was on a beach. Hi, so today's video, I'm actually really excited about this topic. I know that this topic might be a little bit older and I'm sure a lot of people have kind of heard about it before, but if you haven't, boy do I have a story to tell you. And if you have, maybe you haven't heard about it in a long time. I haven't seen videos about this topic in like a couple of years really, so I was really excited to dive into this, especially given some of the new updates to this particular, I don't want to call it a case because it's not like a case. It's, well, I guess it is a case. It's like a court case, but it's more just this crazy story. Today we're going to talk about a topic that I have been interested in and wanting to make a video on for literal years, but just wasn't sure if it would like fit into kind of my channel content. And that is the story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. I first heard about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos years ago, and since learning about the existence of this person, I have consumed every book, podcast, movie, TV series, literally everything. I have consumed all of this media about this topic because it just fascinates me. I get that way about certain things. Anytime I find out about something that's super interesting, I just want to know every little detail and fact that I could possibly know about the topic. Almost like there's a reason I make long form video essays on the internet. I think the reason that I was so drawn to this sort of case in the first place was not only because it has a lot of twists and turns and deceit, and it involves a bunch of like mega rich billionaires that I don't feel bad for. Like not only that, but also I think with a lot of criminal cases, especially like financial crime criminal cases, it's usually pretty cut and dry. Like if you see Anna Delphi, who I can make a whole video about her too, but if you know about Anna Delphi, like she had sort of a motive and she did what she did for a reason, and she was being purposely deceitful to like steal money. And like Bernie Madoff did what he did for a reason, knew what he was doing, and stole money for a reason. With Elizabeth Holmes, I think there's a lot more nuance to this case, and I think that's what makes it so interesting. She has not ever really talked about why she did the things that she did and her sort of thought process in doing what she did. So I think that leaves it open to a lot of interpretation just based on sort of the facts of the case. And that's why I was really interested in talking about this too, is because I was really curious to know what other people thought about like my opinion and also just other opinions and conspiracies floating around out there. But anyway, after that unnecessarily long intro, today we are going to be talking about and jumping into the absolutely bizarre world of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. And if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say those words, it's basically how a Stanford dropout conned a bunch of billionaires into losing hundreds of millions of dollars on a company sort of in the pursuit of revolutionizing the pharmaceutical business. So if you're interested in that, keep watching. Hi friends, Editing Me here, and today's video is sponsored by Casetify. Now you guys know that I've been loving and using the Casetify phone cases for a while now. This is the one that is currently on my phone. It says she, her. Their cases are drop test approved for up to 9.8 feet and are also made with up to 65% recycled material. On top of that, they also come in 100% recycled packaging, which is super important. And on top of that, they just have a really big focus on the environment and trying not to create unnecessary waste. They have a ton of cute designs. I will say one of my favorites right now, it's their mirrored collection, but this one just says focus on the good a bunch and has a bunch of clouds on it and is super reflective and mirrored. They also have adorable little prints, like little cactus prints, or they have like little cow prints. I think my favorite thing about these is that you can customize everything about these cases. So if you love this, for example, like you love the little cactuses, but you don't love the color of the bumper being pink, you can change it to be white or blue or green or clear. And the other cool thing is that their cases are completely customizable. I have ones that have my name on it, my monogram, and you can put it in a ton of different styles. And they also have an antimicrobial coating, which kills up to 99% of germs, which is super nice because obviously our phones collect a lot of dirt and germs throughout the day. If you're interested in trying Casetify phone cases, you can go to casetify.com/smokyglow for 15% off your purchase. Thank you so much to Casetify for sponsoring this video, keeping my phone cute and protected. And let's jump into the the video. So I think with this particular story, it's really good to start at just like literally the beginning, and that is when Elizabeth Holmes was born. She was born on February 3rd, 1984 to a very affluent family in Houston, Texas. This could be a whole separate series about a company called Enron, because while I was scripting and researching for this video, I fell down an Enron rabbit hole. It's basically this insane case of this massive company going bankrupt in the span of like a day and losing hundreds of millions of dollars. And there was like a bunch of lawsuits. They were one of the largest companies ever to file for bankruptcy at the time, back in 2001. And it was just kind of a crazy story of what happened there. But I found it was really interesting when I was looking up Elizabeth Holmes and sort of her beginning, that her father was actually involved in this company, one of the biggest financial failings in American history. So I just find that really funny. It's like apple does not fall far from the tree, apparently. And while her father was never convicted of anything during the Enron scandal, he was definitely not like a major player in all of that the way some other people were. I do think that the parallels between what happened with the company her father worked for and what Elizabeth ended up doing as an adult. Now, by the time Elizabeth Holmes got into high school, she was already taking advanced Mandarin classes at Stanford University over the summer. So her path to this super prestigious university was pretty set in stone, even from a very young age. Now, I think one of the most interesting things I found in the past few years of looking into the Elizabeth Holmes case is sort of the impression that she left on her professors that she had at Stanford University her freshman year. One of Elizabeth's very first educational advisors has actually done a lot of interviews about meeting her and has a lot of very negative things to say about her, but most notably has told the story about how Elizabeth came back from, I guess she was doing like field work in China. She came back from that and had this idea of a patch that you would put on your arm, and through the patch you would be able to get all of your vaccinations or antibiotics or other medication that could help you instead of having to get that medication through a needle. She brought this patent and this idea to her professor, and her professor basically flat out told her that that was scientifically impossible, because it is, especially with the science that we currently have and what we know. It's just not possible to transfer that type of medication through a patch. And this professor has talked a lot about how Elizabeth's reaction to that information was to try and convince her that that like wasn't true. She was like 18, 19 years old trying to convince this Stanford professor that she knew more about medical sciences than she did. And on top of that, she wouldn't really take no for an answer. Like, she had this idea, this is what she thought was gonna happen, this is what she thought was gonna work, and she refused to accept the word no when it came to that not working, which led to this initial advisor transferring her to a different advisor who we'll get to him in a second. I feel like it's really important to note right off the bat about Elizabeth Holmes is that not only is this story very interesting in the sense of what she did, but she as a person is also very interesting. She has a lot of like quirks, I guess you could say. One of her biggest is that she is terrifyingly afraid of needles, like absolutely terrified of needles. She thinks that it is a form of human torture. She thinks having to get needles to get injections for vaccines or for medication is like a crime. She basically wanted to revolutionize the medical industry simply so she did not have to constantly have shots. Like, that was literally one of her key motivations. So anyway, after she was denied by this one Stanford professor who was like, this will not work, she was transferred to Channing Robertson, who was basically immediately enthralled by Elizabeth Holmes, interested in her ideas, thought she was like this revolutionary student. And as Elizabeth launched her company in 2003, the company's name was Theranos, Channing Robertson actually left his position as a professor at Stanford to literally go work for her at Theranos, this brand new startup that she just created. Like, this man believed in her so much and believed in her ideas so much that he left his very prestigious, well-paying job to go be a part of this startup and be a like mentoring figure to her as she started this company. I think another important thing to talk about when we're talking about Elizabeth Holmes in terms of like her quirks is she seemed to have a very, and this is in no way to like sort of shame a woman in a science-led field by saying that she was able to like convince a lot of men purely because she's a woman. I think if anything, the saddest parts about the Elizabeth Holmes story is the fact that she was such a pioneer for women in STEM. And she, sorry, that TikTok sound just came into my brain. The like, I am a woman in STEM, Bunsen burner. Anyway, I think she was and could have been a very positive role model for women in STEM, but I think that she also, knowing that she was a woman in the STEM field, used that to her advantage, and she kind of had this way about her where just like men were instantly attracted to not really her, but more so her brain. Like she was able to use this charm that she had to sort of charm these men into believing and thinking that she was like the next big thing. I also think while we're on the topic of her sort of like charm and other weird quirks, let's just get them all out of the way in one. The first one was that Elizabeth Holmes was like obsessed with Steve Jobs. She literally thought he was the best thing ever. It's kind of seemed like she was trying to emulate Steve Jobs. She wore black turtlenecks constantly, and she kind of gave the same reasoning for why she did so as Steve Jobs. She basically said that it was just less time in the morning to always have the same outfit, which is exactly what he said. And when she was confronted with people being like, that's what Steve Jobs said, she'd be like, well, yeah, it's literally her answer. Additionally, Elizabeth spoke in a very deep voice. And there's been a lot of sort of points of contention with this deep voice. A lot of people have come forward and said that is absolutely not her real voice and that she actually had a much higher pitched voice, but she deepened it when she was being interviewed by the press or when she was talking to investors, but it would be normal the rest of the time. Some other people who are like her family have said she's just always had a deep voice. Personally, I feel like she was changing her voice. I don't necessarily think it was in a sinister way though. I actually think it makes a lot of sense the way that Elizabeth did a lot of the things she did, being that she was a woman in a mostly male dominated field. I think that Elizabeth wanted to have a lower pitch and dress in all these turtlenecks and sort of have a really serious demeanor because she wanted to be seen as serious in the world of science and felt like she could not do that if she was more sort of like feminine. However, I think that's stupid. The other weird thing about her is she doesn't blink. She literally doesn't blink. I didn't know where else to put that piece of information in this video. Like I wasn't sure where to put that into my script, so I just had it as a footnote of like when it's organic to say she also didn't blink, and that weirded a lot of people out, especially people who were interviewing her. She has these like really big bright blue eyes, and in the span of like 2 minutes she blinks like one time. She makes this really intense eye contact with people. I don't know. There's a lot about her that's just, again, these kind of weird quirks that she's got going on. Anyway, sorry, that was just all a side note, but that's all like kind of important information into why I think people are so interested in her, is because it's not only that she did all of this like financially bad stuff, she also just had a lot of these quirks that people were really drawn in by when talking about her. Now, with the help of Channing Roberts, by 2004, Elizabeth had raised about $6 million, which she spent on researching and funding for Theranos and sort of continued to grow this business. And by 2010, so in just 6 years, she had raised over $92 million in venture capital from investors, which is like fucking crazy. That is an insane amount of money for a startup to be getting. And in Silicon Valley and in sort of the tech world and the pharmaceutical world, she was a big deal. And the amount of funding that she was getting for this project was like unprecedented. And I think in a way allowed her to raise even more money and continue going without ever really being checked on if what she was doing was actually working. It was sort of like this interesting snowball effect where she had like the former Secretary of State on her board, and that gave her all this legitimacy. So all of his very rich friends were like, hey, we can trust this. It was just craziness. Elizabeth's main project and her sort of main product for Theranos was a machine called the Edison. The Edison was supposed to be able to take a single drop of blood and run, I believe it was over 220 diagnostic tests on that single drop of blood to give you accurate lab results that normally you would need vials and vials of blood to get those results from. So essentially, Elizabeth's plan was that if you got a single drop of blood from somebody's finger, like you just did a finger prick and got a drop of blood, you could test that and you could see if somebody had cancer or see if somebody was pre-diabetic or had an STD. Like, the whole point was that you as a consumer could go into your local drugstore, you could sit down, have this single drop of blood put into this machine, you could pick from a menu whatever tests you wanted run, and then within a few minutes you would have the results to those tests. The whole sort of premise behind this was that the everyday person should be able to request blood testing whenever they want. They should be able to go in whenever they want and get this really simple blood testing done to figure out if something's going on with them. Her whole backstory was that Elizabeth had an uncle when she was younger that she was very close to, and he very unexpectedly got cancer and passed away. And she said that he was gone too soon and she wanted to work to make it so that we didn't lose people too soon ever again. Now, people have come forward and said that she wasn't, like family members have come forward and said that she wasn't actually close with this uncle and that she was just kind of using his story as a marketing tool. But regardless, I think that that is a message that really, really resonated with people. It would resonate with the public, but also it would resonate with investors. Who wouldn't want to be the person who helped fund this magical machine? Now, along with these other influential figures that she had met kind of along her journey, I feel like between the years of 2004 and 2010, it's a little bit kind of not wiped out, but just not a lot was happening yet. These were really the developmental years of Theranos, those 6 years, where she was really just pulling in investors, having a lot of money funded into Theranos, meeting a lot of very powerful and influential people in her field. And additionally, in 2008 is when she met someone who became very important to the story, and that is Ramesh Sunny Balwani. I'm just gonna call him Sunny from now on, but he is a very important part of this story. From basically 2008 until shit hit the fan, every time I mention Elizabeth Holmes, Sunny is also included in that. Like, they were very much a team. The two of them did end up dating, but they were very much a team when it came to Theranos. So in 2010, Theranos became a lot more recognizable. It was getting a lot more media attention, but by 2013, they had really secured a lot more investors, a lot more funding, and just a lot more credibility. They had partnered with Walgreens to have the Edison machines inside of Walgreens, and the actual Theranos laboratory where they were creating the Edison was actually also a fully functioning lab in Palo Alto. So a lot of people who needed to go get blood work in the Palo Alto area would be sent to Theranos for diagnostic testing. And by 2014, I think this is when Elizabeth Holmes sort of started becoming a bit of a household name, because she was put on the Forbes list of richest women and owned 50% of Theranos, and they valued that her net worth was $4.5 billion, which, by the way, I just feel like that really shows how fake net worths are, because they were like valuing this company so high. She had one product and like nobody had even really proved that it worked yet. Like, I think that's just what's so bonkers to me about all of this, is that like she literally had a machine that couldn't do anything and she was given a $4.5 billion net worth for a company that had one product that didn't work. Lunacy. Anyway, now while all of this is happening, she's like on Forbes richest woman's list. She's getting a ton of media attention. She's meeting with like the Clintons, Biden, and she's going to the White House. She's going to meetings with like the head of Apple and Mark Zuckerberg and like all of these other billionaire tech startup people. Like, she is a big deal in the tech startup world. Like, she is making a name for herself. While all of this is happening, behind the scenes at Theranos, things are falling apart. She had basically convinced all of these very important people, especially in America, she had basically convinced all of these very important politicians, bank owners, investors, that she was about to revolutionize modern medicine. And honestly, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion. It doesn't change what she did. Like, it doesn't change what happened. But I actually do believe that Elizabeth Holmes thought she could make the Edison work. I think that it's interesting because it's weird that it's named the Edison. Maybe this was purposeful, but Thomas Edison's whole thing was that he like couldn't figure out some of his inventions and that he just kept telling people he had figured it out. And at the very last second, the invention would magically work. Like, he would find the fix at the last second, everything would be fine. And I think Elizabeth Holmes lived with that same sort of mindset. I think that she genuinely thought if she could just have more time, if she could just buy herself more time, that her product would eventually be everything that she claimed it to be. Therefore, she would not be lying to all of these mega billionaires. However, that's not how it happened. By 2014, it was revealed that she had over $400 million from investors, which basically tripled the amount of money she made in 2010 in just 4 years, which is, again, lunacy. And it seemed like they were sort of at this perfect storm to take over the world. But the problem was the machine that they created literally just didn't work. And most of the people that worked at Theranos and worked in the lab and were working on this machine knew that it didn't work. A lot of employees were actually threatened by Elizabeth or Sunny. Basically, they would write emails saying, this product doesn't work, here is the problem, you're lying to all of these investors, and they would either be fired or they would be threatened with legal action if they ever spoke to another person about the fact that this product did not work. They sort of had this approach in their startup that was a very problem-solving attitude, and basically anyone who had problems that came forward, like, I don't know, the machine that we're selling doesn't work. Anybody who came forward with that reality was told that they weren't being solution-based in their approach and was shut down. So the idea that Elizabeth just like didn't know all these problems were happening, or Sunny didn't know, is a complete farce. Like, they absolutely knew that the machine did not work. So many of their employees have come forward and talked about the fact that everyone there knew the machine didn't work. A lot of former employees have talked about the culture at the company and have just said how sort of rigid and hostile it was. You weren't allowed to be honest, and a lot of people were frankly scared of leaving. They had heard all of this hype about Theranos and they had heard how big of a deal this company was. And I think a lot of people honestly just felt intimidated or scared to leave something that was so hyped up because they felt like, well, maybe I'm just the one in the wrong. Like, other employees weren't really allowed to talk to each other about the fact that they all saw that something was wrong here. They weren't allowed to communicate that. There was only this sort of positive energy that had to be happening at the lab. And even when people would come, like they would have reporters come or they would have the FDA come and do inspections. There were literally fake labs that were created with these fake Edison machines that did not work in order to give off the appearance to all of these people that they were a fully functioning lab with their product, which wasn't true. Basically, how they were running things was people would go and give blood at the Theranos machines, right? Like, they would go to CVS and they would try to give blood on the Theranos machine. They would try to give the little finger prick. And somebody would say, like, oh, our machine isn't working today. We have to actually draw vials of your blood. So people would get their blood drawn like normal, and then those blood samples would be sent to Theranos, and they would not be put in the Edison. They would be tested the same way that any blood testing site would be testing your blood. It was found out later that of the 220 tests that they claimed the Edison could do, it could actually only do 7. 7 out of the 220 they were promising. And on top of that, when people did go to use the Edison and they did go to just give the single prick of blood, a lot of times they were getting false test results. So people would get their test results back and it would say that they were pre-diabetic, and they would go to their doctor in shambles and panicking. People would get blood tests back that said their, hearts were acting up or that they had cancerous cells. All of these crazy things that, when double checked, were absolutely not true. So it was causing the public who were using the machines this mass amount of trauma, thinking that they had some life-altering illness that they literally did not have. So all of this was going on, and as the years went on, there definitely started to be more cracks in the system. Like, more customers of Theranos started coming forward and complaining that they got inaccurate test results. More people who worked for Theranos and then left were coming forward with stories about how the company was not working the way it was supposed to. And right before everything sort of started coming crashing down in 2015, the FDA actually did approve one of Theranos's tests. It was a test for herpes. And I think the really interesting thing about this is they talk about it in all the documentaries and stuff too. But in 2015, when the FDA approved this one singular test, this was seen as like a massive victory for Elizabeth and Sunny and the rest of the company. They came back to the office and threw this massive party. There was like a bounce house. Theranos. They had catering, they had alcohol everywhere. Like, this was seen as a massive celebration, when in reality, it was only one test of the other like 200 that they were trying to get approved. And those tests were not getting approved, but instead of focusing on that, they were focusing on the one that did get approved and throwing this massive celebration because of it. I think that scenario is just really telling of the culture at Theranos. They kind of took what they could and ran with it. Like, they had this one success that was honestly just very small in the grand scheme of things, but they took that and made it this huge deal to make everybody think that they were succeeding and doing super well. And when in reality, Elizabeth had burned through most of the money she got from investors trying to put it into more research. And on top of that, the product didn't work. I can't stress that enough. This whole time, this product does not work. Like, that is craziness. What's even crazier is that, the product still doesn't work, right? During this time in 2015, Elizabeth was literally in talks with the United States military to try and get some of these Edison machines out into like active combat zones so that troops who were maybe in places where they didn't have access to blood testing or things like that, they could be there and they could be utilized by those troops. So she was about to send blood testing machines that didn't work to United States soldiers and let them depend on those test results. Like, this is how twisted and fucked this whole thing is. And honestly, if we're talking about the actual victims of Theranos, which we're gonna get to in a second, sort of the downfall, but if we're talking about the actual victims of Theranos, I do not think it is the billionaires who lost hundreds of millions of dollars in investments. I don't feel bad for them, and I don't really give a shit that they lost all that money. I honestly don't even really give a shit that she like lied to them and in turn they lost their money. I feel bad for the people who invested who are not billionaires who lost all of their money, and I also feel bad for the people who actually got blood tests done at Theranos and got inaccurate results that caused them a great deal of emotional stress and trauma. Those are the real victims of Theranos. Despite what the courts of law will tell you, those are the actual victims in my opinion. Now in 2015, there's a reporter named John Carreyrou. I apologize if I pronounced that name wrong, but he has written some wonderful books on this topic if you're ever interested. He wrote Bad Blood, which is kind of like the Theranos book, but he also is a large part in why Theranos had such a large downfall. In 2015, he released a Wall Street Journal article that was basically covering Theranos. The article basically exposed that the Edison product only worked for certain blood tests and that most of the blood tests that were going through the Theranos lab were actually being used with typical methods and not this magical machine that Elizabeth created. And also basically talks about the way that Holmes was actively defrauding and lying to her investors in order to get capital for a company and a product that does not work. Now, Elizabeth's initial reaction to this was to basically just deny it all. She got on national TV and was being interviewed and basically said that the story was a complete lie, that people just think you're crazy until you change the world, like that whole shtick. But despite hearing rumblings in the past from former employees, this time her investors were not really buying what she was selling anymore and started taking a harder look at what was actually happening in the Theranos lab. Now, on top of this sort of new skepticism from her investors, the FDA also started going heavily after Theranos and basically released two very heavily redacted reports that cited 14 different concerns with the company's medical practices, including one where they had an uncleared medical device, which we're assuming is the Edison. Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, who were two of the prominent board members for Theranos, were moved off the main board of directors and were moved to a board of counselors, which I'm assuming was just to try to get distance from the shit show that this was about to be. Like, I can only assume that was the goal of moving them off the main board of directors, was to try to distance themselves. And they also tried to create a new medical board, which I guess was supposed to come in and have this like I don't know. Though it was all for show, basically. Like, none of this was actually real change that was a reaction to this. They were trying to just cover their asses, basically. When all of this started falling apart, more and more kept coming out. Like Safeway, who is a massive grocery store chain, had allegedly invested about $350 million into getting Theranos testing sites put into their store. They pulled out of their deal and basically lost all of the money because they wanted no association with Elizabeth Holmes or Theranos. And by early 2016, the FDA basically sent Theranos a letter saying that their methods of testing were not complying with federal standards standards and that they had 10 days to fix the issues, and then 10 days later said that Theranos didn't fix the issues because the issue was they were supposed to be using the Edison and they weren't. So they didn't fix those issues, and then they were banned for running lab work for over 2 years. I think the biggest problem with Theranos in general is that she just lied so much that once she had like this big ball of yarn that was this giant lie, that was this billion-dollar company, and once somebody pulled one strand the wrong way, in this case it was the Wall Street Journal article, the whole ball just started unraveling so quickly that it was impossible for Theranos or Elizabeth or Sunny to keep up with it because she was unchecked for so long. Like, none of these investors were ever questioning her. Her team wasn't even really allowed to question her. That wasn't really allowed. It was sort of this like, oh my God, we're gonna change the world. Everything's gonna be great attitude. Once she started getting called out for things and she couldn't keep lying, she literally did not know what to do. So 6 months after Theranos was called out by the FDA and federal judges for not complying with testing standards, the network of Elizabeth Holmes was adjusted to $0. Mind you, 2 years prior, it was 4.5 billion. Yikes. And additionally, the value of Theranos went from $9 billion to $800 million, according to Forbes. Walgreens also closed all of their Theranos testing locations, which was over 40 stores, and basically cut ties with the company completely. In October of 2016, Theranos was sued by her investors of the Partner Fund Management Group for $96.1 million. It's said that they settled in 2017 for an undisclosed amount, so apparently some of those people got some of their money back. There's so much that happens in this time frame, because on top of being sued by her former investors, she was also sued by Walgreens for $140 million. They were basically saying that she breached their contract, which she did. And on top of that, Theranos was laying off employees left and right. Like in October, they laid off about 340. In January 2017, they laid off 155 employees, which was basically 41% of the entire staff. And shortly after they laid off those people, the lab was closed anyway, and all of those people lost their jobs because they failed a lab inspection. Now, for all of the independent lawsuits that Theranos was in, they did end up settling most of those. For example, they were sued by the Arizona Attorney General, and they agreed to a $4.65 million settlement for Arizona residents with promises not to run a lab for the next 2 years. However, her legal troubles were not over, because in March of 2018, she was charged with massive fraud, which is fraud that involves over $700 million. They basically accused her of an elaborate years-long fraud. This is a direct quote. Basically accused her of an elaborate years-long fraud in which they exaggerated or made false statements about the company's technology, business, and financial performance. So both Elizabeth and Sunny allegedly knew that Theranos could only perform 12 of the 200 tests. Sorry, I think I said it was 7. It was 12, I guess. 12 of the 200 tests. And they also basically knew that the machine did not work the way that they were telling investors that it did. Now, despite all of this, Theranos was actually still an active company. In 2018, after being just absolutely slammed with legal charges like massive fraud and also wire fraud, Elizabeth did step down and a man named David Taylor took over as CEO. However, by the end of September, Theranos basically dissolved as a company. I guess they tried to find buyers, but like, I don't know who the hell would buy that company. So it had to be dissolved. And during this time, Elizabeth and Sunny are both actively fighting their court cases separately. Now, financial court cases often take a long time. So from this years of like 2018 up until just recently 2022, that's when all of this court case has been going on. Now, while Sunny is also being tried for the same crimes as Elizabeth, Sunny's trial has been moving a lot slower, and it's not scheduled to start until next year, 2023. However, Elizabeth's trial is actually finishing up. Now, Elizabeth has been like out and about this whole time. It's not like she's been serving time in prison while waiting for her trial. However, in July of 2020 is when the trial was supposed to start, but due to COVID-19, it was pushed. But in September of 2020, we learned that her defense for this case was going to primarily be that she was in an abusive relationship with Sunny, and that he was sort of the mastermind behind all of this and manipulated and was abusive towards her, which is why she did the things that she did. I'm not gonna really speak on or speculate anything to do with that particular line of defense because I don't really think it's my place to say if somebody was in an abusive relationship or not. I wasn't like a jury in this trial, so I don't really feel like I should be giving an opinion on that. That was her initial defense to a lot of these claims, was that a lot of it was Sunny and she was basically being manipulated into doing a lot of the things that he wanted to do. We also learned at the end of 2020 that Elizabeth Holmes was actually pregnant. A lot of people, including the journalist who wrote the original Wall Street Journal article, who's really looked into her, have said that they think that this pregnancy was done as a way to have sort of a legal defense and as a way to maybe get less time in prison. Personally, I don't want to believe that someone would do that. Like, I don't want to believe somebody would get pregnant and bring a child into this world just to help with a legal defense. However, I've seen and heard crazier things, even just in this case. So it wouldn't really surprise me if that was the case, but let's just like hope that it wasn't. Regardless, Elizabeth Holmes' pregnancy postponed her trial in March of 2021, and she actually gave birth in July of 2021. After she gave birth, her trial started, and there were 3 months of testimonies from 32 different witnesses. This case took a long time to present. They brought in a lot of different people. There were a lot of different charges. She had like 11 different charges against her. So there was just a lot to get through and to prove on the prosecution's end. And the jury ended up deliberating for over 50 hours before they came to their verdict. So just a couple of weeks ago, we found out that Elizabeth was found guilty on 4 out of 11 charges. She was found guilty of, I'm not the most legally minded person, so pardon me for just reading this, but there's no way I could just say this. She was found guilty of 1 count of conspiracy to defraud investors, as well as 3 wire fraud counts tied to specific investors. She was found not guilty on 3 additional charges concerning defrauding patients, which is nuts to me, and 1 charge of conspiracy to defraud patients. Not found guilty on any of the patient-related things, literally only found guilty to the investors. And for 3 other charges, they returned a no verdict, which basically means they just couldn't come to a consensus, which were more charges about just like defrauding investors. She hasn't been sentenced yet, but at maximum, she could get 20 years in prison and possibly get $250,000 fines for each count. So $1 million fines for each count if they punish her to the fullest extent of the law. Now, weirdly, I was talking on my podcast with my husband, Charles. We have a podcast called The Glow Show, if you're interested. But I was talking about this Elizabeth Holmes case, and I was saying how I think it's very weird that she was found guilty on charges that were only about investor fraud and not the defrauding patients with fake test results. And a lot of you actually commented that this is not uncommon, and a lot of people have talked about how this is not uncommon. Basically, the reason that people who defraud investors tend to get more serious jail time and tend to go to jail for those crimes is because the American system really relies on people investing in companies. And so people want to know that it's safe to invest. And if people commit large scale fraud like this, they're going to be held accountable. So the reality is the justice system especially doesn't really care about the patients. They care about making an example of her so that other people don't defraud people this way, so that it's safe for people to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into companies to keep the economy going. Personally, I care more about the trauma of the patients, but that is just a kooky, crazy thing that I believe in. Anyway, final thoughts. Obviously she hasn't been sentenced yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if she gets a pretty harsh sentence. I also think that Sunny is probably going to get an even harsher sentence. But I think the reason that this case was so fascinating to me and just so insane to follow is because the person at the center of it all, which is Elizabeth Holmes, is so difficult to follow. She's kind of like an enigma and a mystery. There's not a lot of other information about her other than these weird quirks that she has. Like, nobody knows any real personal information about who she was as a person. It seemed like her entire life really revolved around Theranos and building up this massive made-up company, which is just like super interesting to see. Basically, based on everything that I've researched and read, obviously I do not know this woman. I could be completely off base here, but I think that Theranos and the Edison and revolutionizing the world was less about actually trying to help people and was much more about boosting up the ego of Elizabeth Holmes. Like, I don't think think she really cared if she saved lives and revolutionized the world. I think she cared that she was the one doing it. Like, she just wanted to be the face of whatever amazing thing she could come up with. She didn't really care what that was. She just wanted to be the face of it. And I think that's glaringly evident by the fact that she literally didn't value truth or science or proper medical practices and was just so much more focused on her company being seen as this incredible thing. It's almost like, you know how there's like those rich people that are not as rich as they seem, but they're very obsessed with status symbols. Like, they're obsessed with having Birkin bags and they're obsessed with having really nice cars, but they're actually not as rich as you think they are. They're just trying to sort of put up this facade. That's how I view Elizabeth Holmes in Theranos, is she really wasn't as successful as she made people think she was. It was all just this gigantic facade. And I don't think she really cared about that until she started having to face consequences for those actions. Like, I don't think she really cared that she caused a lot of people a lot of distress by giving them inaccurate medical information. I also think similarly to people like Bernie Madoff, she didn't really have an exit strategy, because it was either going to just like work forever or she was gonna get caught and she was going down. Like, there was no in between there. I think she just had been so good at lying and so successful for over 10 years that she had no reason to think that all of this would come crumbling down. So she didn't even begin to think of what would happen after the truth about Theranos was found out. Now, here's my sort of unpopular opinion of the video. And I always lose people when I talk about this, but it's how I feel. I'm not even entirely sure that she deserves to be in jail. But I don't even think 99% of people who are in jail deserve to be in jail. I think unless you're like a violent offender, there's really a lot of other paths that we could go down other than the very flawed and corrupt criminal justice system in our country. And I don't think that people who commit financial crimes should go to jail. However, I think they should just be poor. Like, I think she should just have to have no money and dedicate a lot of her life for the next at least few years doing community service in the communities that she was actively hurting by the blood tests that she was falsifying. Like, those are the actual victims here. I could give two shits about investors. And frankly, I don't even think jail is going to be that much of a punishment for Elizabeth Holmes, because she's going to go to rich people jail. So it's not even like it's going to actually be a punishment for her. It's just all a show. It's kind of like, honestly, this whole trial and the punishment is basically the equivalent of Theranos. Like, it's all a sort of show and a facade to make other investors feel better, but it's not actually going to do anything. I don't know. At the end of the day, I think this whole thing is just kind of unsatisfying. Yes, there was the payout, but that only amounted to very little actual money for the people who were affected by the blood test, because class action lawsuits very rarely provide substantial amounts of money to people, especially these type where it's like so many people were affected. And it feels like the only people who are actually getting real justice for what happened are billionaires, and I don't feel bad for them. I think that's the reason this case is so almost like fun to watch, because it's, at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of really, really rich people having really, really rich people problems. And at the center of it is this woman who wears turtlenecks and doesn't blink. And like, that's just fascinating to me. But anyway, that is my video on Elizabeth Holmes and the bizarre world of Elizabeth Holmes. I would love to know your opinions on this. Did you know about this before this video, and what was your opinion? What did you learn in this video, and what was your opinion? Like, I would love to hear your conspiracy theories, your thoughts on her motivations. I genuinely want to know. Nobody in my life cares about this case as much as me. So if anybody else is like weirdly hyper obsessed with it, I'd love to know. But yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, or just like, or just subscribe, or do neither. Honestly, just so happy you're watching me. Thank you so much for being here. My merch, my social media, and my podcast and vlog channel will be linked down below, along with my social justice spotlight, which has some important links and places that you can donate. And yeah, I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!